All right, welcome back. Today, we're going to break down two really powerful ways to understand the human experience: narrative research and ethnography. Now, they both tell stories, right? But, and this is the key, they use totally different lenses to capture them.
So, let's just start with a simple question to frame all of this. To really get human stories, should you be using a microscope or a wide-angle lens? I mean, are you trying to zoom way in on one single, powerful life story? Or are you trying to pan way out to see the whole complex culture of an entire group? That choice right there is really at the heart of everything we're talking about today.
Okay, so here's what we've got on tap. We'll start with that fundamental choice, then we'll dive into each method, compare their unique toolkits, and see how they turn all that data into actual insight. The goal? To help you figure out which lens is right for the story you want to tell.
Okay, let's get right into it. The first big choice, the fundamental distinction. It really is the first and honestly the most important decision you have to make. Are you zeroing in on the individual or are you looking at the group? Because that single decision is going to shape absolutely everything else you do. You know, it really all boils down to the question you're asking. Narrative research is super personal. It's asking, what is the meaning of this one person's experience? But ethnography, that's all about the big picture, the system. It's asking, how does this whole cultural system work? So one is all about the I, and the other is all about the we.
All right, let's grab our first lens, narrative research. This approach is all about using that research microscope, right? We're zooming way in to capture all the rich, complex, and sometimes messy details of a single life story.
So what is it really? Well, you could think of narrative research as being kind of like a biographer. The main goal here is to capture the sheer depth and detail of personal histories, to really understand how a person makes sense of their own life's journey. Now, this is where it gets super interesting. Look at the researcher's role here. It is not just about swooping in and collecting a story. No way. It's about building it together. It's this collaborative dance where the researcher and the participant are constantly negotiating the story's meaning. And this brings up some huge, crucial questions about power. Like, wait a minute, who actually owns this story? The whole point is to make sure the process is respectful and that both people get something out of it. So, once all those stories are on the table, what's next? Well, the main analytical job is something called restorying. Basically, you take all these scattered experiences, memories, and little anecdotes, and you start to reshape them into a single, coherent narrative that actually has a clear flow. And this visual here just lays it out perfectly. Restorying organizes everything chronologically. You've got the beginning, which sets the context and talks about past events. Then the middle, with all the key turning points and the real tensions. And finally, the end, the resolution, and what the future might look like. It's all about finding that narrative arc that exists within a life. Okay, time to put down the microscope and pick up that wide-angle lens. Let's switch gears to our second approach, ethnography. This one is all about mapping out entire groups and really getting a handle on their shared cultural patterns. With ethnography, you can think of the researcher as a kind of cultural map maker, a cartographer. See, they're not focused on one person's winding path. They're trying to map the intricate workings of a whole community, all its shared rituals, its unspoken rules, its collective identity, the whole shebang. And how do they do this? Through some seriously intensive fieldwork. This is not a quick interview and you're done. We're talking about a long-term immersion. The researcher has to gain access, often through gatekeepers, and then they literally become a part of the daily life, just observing everything. The ultimate goal here is to capture what's called the emic perspective. That is, seeing the world from the insider's point of view. So yeah, the whole point is to take all these observations, all the interviews, all the artifacts you find, and assemble them into this big, comprehensive, holistic portrait of the group's life. You're not just describing it, you're explaining that underlying system that makes it all tick. Okay, so how do these researchers actually get all this information? As you can probably guess by now, their toolkits look pretty different from each other. So you can think of narrative tools as being like these delicate archaeological brushes, right? You're carefully uncovering a personal life course, layer by layer. But ethnographic tools, they're more like a full-on survey kit. You're casting a really wide net to map out those broad group dynamics and cultural patterns. And this table just makes the contrast so clear. For narrative research, the key tools are really intimate and personal, We're talking diaries, letters, maybe even a memory box full of old photos and keepsakes. But for ethnographic research, the tools are much more systemic. You've got spatial maps to understand how a community uses its physical space, network analysis to see who's connected to whom, and even surveys to grab that group-wide data.
Okay, so collecting all this data is one thing, but making sense of it all? That's a whole other ballgame. And as you might guess, each method ends up with a very, very different final product.
So for narrative research, we circle right back to that idea of restorying. The final output is this beautifully retold, structured story that actually makes sense of a person's life timeline. It creates a clear, compelling narrative that really honors that individual's journey.
But for ethnography, the outcome is something called thick description. And this isn't just a report of, here's what I saw. Oh no. It is a rich, layered, super detailed interpretation that explains the meaning behind a group's behaviors. It weaves together that insider's perspective with the researcher's analysis to show you, from the outside, how their entire world works.
So there you have it. We've looked at the two paths, we've seen their unique tools, and we've talked about their very different outcomes. Which brings us right back to that original choice.
At the end of the day, it really just comes down to this simple but pretty profound trade-off. Are you looking for the incredible depth of one person's story? The narrative research is your lens. Or are you after the comprehensive breadth of a collective culture? Well, then you're talking about ethnography.
And that, right there, is the crucial takeaway. There is no better method here, not at all. There's only the right tool for the job. So, for the next story you want to understand, you've got to ask yourself, what do I really want to see? Do I need that microscope, or do I need the wide-angle lens? Because the right choice depends entirely on the story you're trying to tell.